Hello, my name is Andrew Braverman, and for those of you who don't know me, I'm a longtime Alpha Phi Omega volunteer, concentrating mainly in regions P and R. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about risk management, what it is, why it's important, what we can do to help manage our risk, and where you can get more information should you need any. Let's start with the definition of risk management. Risk management, by definition, is the identification, evaluation, and prioritization of risks, followed by coordinated and economical application of resources to minimize, monitor, and control the probability or impact of unfortunate events, or to maximize the realization of opportunities. It is not risk avoidance. Now, there are a lot of words there. Basically, what we're saying is we don't want to do things that are going to harm us if we can at all avoid them. When we say risk management is not risk avoidance, I say it because realistically, you cannot avoid all risk. There is risk in everything you do. There's risk in walking the streets. There's risk in driving your car. No matter what you do, there's risk. You cannot avoid it. The best you can do is manage it and try to keep it to a minimum. Why is risk management so important? Well, there are a number of reasons why we want to make sure that we have managed our risks. Let's start with the simple, most obvious one. If we have managed our risks correctly, we will be relatively safe with whatever we do. We don't want to not know how to deal with the situations that we're going into, whether those are situations that require equipment, that we don't know how to use the equipment, whether those are situations that require general knowledge or knowledge of how to deal with things like children and not know how to deal with that. So we want to make sure that we are all being safe. We also want to make sure that during our events, whether they be service projects, whether they be fellowship events or something else, we want to make sure that we reduce as many unexpected events as possible. We can't really plan for the unexpected, but what we can do is plan so that we have as few unexpected events as possible. Why? It's generally our unexpected events that are going to cause the most problem. Risk management is also very important to keep our reputation as good as we can keep it. On each of your chapters, on each of your campuses, on each of your general localities, you hopefully have a relatively good reputation. So that if you go in and try to do a project, people will allow you to do what you want to do, will allow you to help them. If we screw things up to the point that people don't trust us or don't like us because they don't like the way we're doing things, then we're not going to be able to do what we are here to do. Therefore, it's very important to keep our reputation up, and by not having proper risk management and not acting correctly, we're going to screw up that reputation. As I'm sure many of your chapters know, in order to do some of the projects and some of the events that we do these days, we absolutely need to be able to show that we have insurance. Currently, the fraternity does have insurance. That insurance is something that covers each of your chapters. That insurance is relatively inexpensive at this time and is relatively good insurance. However, as with most insurance these days, the more you have to use it, the more the price of the insurance will go up, and the more problem it will be to get that insurance. We want to make sure that we can keep our insurance. Therefore, we want to show that we are creating appropriate risk management situations and that we are following up with those situations and keeping our risks to an absolute minimum, so hopefully the insurance company won't have to get involved. Now, whether covered by insurance or not, we also have a financial risk with everything we do, and we want to make sure that that risk is kept to a minimum. That also is done with proper risk management. And last, but certainly not least, if we take proper precautions and do proper risk management all the way through, we're setting up a culture for the people who are currently in the chapter and for future members of the chapter and the fraternity that risk management is important and that we need to deal with it. We want to keep that culture going so that we have our proper risk management and we can keep all those other things in line. If we don't do that and we don't keep our culture as a properly managed, risk managed situation, we're going to have problems in the future. Now, how do we manage risk? What do we need to do to manage risks? Well, before we can manage anything, we need to know what they are. So the first step is to identify the risks that we're dealing with. We need to identify the risks that we deal with on a regular basis with pretty much any project or event that we do. And we also have to identify risks that are specific to, in particular at the moment, our recurring projects, but we also want to look at each project as it comes up and see if there are any further identifiable specific risks. As we identify any risk, we need to assess those risks and put them into one of a few categories. If those risks are very minor and there's very little we can do about them, we may just need to accept the fact that those are risks, be aware of them, be conscious of them as we're doing our project, and move on. Look, there are risks crossing the street. We all know that if we don't, follow that old adage of look both ways before you cross the street, there's a chance you're going to get hit by a car. That's a risk. It's a risk that we take, and it's a risk that we have to be aware of. We hope that at this point, those of you who are in college in our chapters are old enough that you understand that risk and accept that risk as you walk the streets and take appropriate precautions on a normal basis. That's something we just accept. That same risk occurs as we try to get to projects, as we walk to projects, to an extent as we drive to projects, especially if we're driving other people to projects. So there may be certain things we just have to accept. For those that we are not willing to just accept, or that we can do something simple about in order to mitigate the risk without having to just accept it, we can get into risk mitigation. Risk mitigation is something that basically says we're willing to take the risk, but in order to take the risk, we're going to do the following things to try to keep that risk as low as possible. Let's take driving people to projects. You could say nobody can ever drive somebody else to a project. That's probably not what you want to do. That's going to be potentially more expensive. It's going to surely be unenvironmental. If it's something that you feel that the chapter needs to do and can do, that's fine. But in many cases, that's just not what's going to happen. So what can we do? We can mitigate that risk by saying, okay, If you're taking other people, let's make sure that there are not too many people in the car. Maybe that there are seatbelts for everybody who's sitting in the car. Maybe that we make sure that everybody is in their seatbelts. Things like making sure the person who's driving the car is a licensed driver. Yes, much of this is common sense, but, those are mitigation procedures for driving a car. Now, those are the simple and straightforward things. Let's say we're talking about something that is more dangerous. There are chapters that do some very dangerous things in the course of some of the projects they deal with. And one in particular that I'm thinking of, while the situation calls for some dangerous things, they make sure that before they let anybody near taking that risk, they have made sure that the person goes through proper training, that the person is supervised a number of times before this person can be out on their own or supervise somebody else. They make sure that only people who are properly supervised and trained can be in the area when this is going on. All of those are items that'll mitigate the risk, that'll keep the risk as low as possible, but still allow them to do the job they want to do. For those that you can't accept and can't figure out appropriate mitigation for, you need to just avoid the risk. Avoidance is something that's allowed. You can avoid it if that's what you choose to do, but it's not necessarily what is required. You've got to figure that out, and you've got to work that out with the appropriate people. We need to be able to control our risks, and that's what we're doing by putting things in these categories. Once we do that, we need to review what we've done, make sure it works, and periodically repeat this process so that we see that everything is there and everything is covered. As I mentioned, a number of the things that we need to look at when we're dealing with our mitigation is common sense. We want to make sure that we're following those common sense rules. We want to make sure that we're following all the laws, policies, and rules of our fraternity, of the localities that we're working in, of the schools that we're working in and with. We want to create a risk management policy. That policy can include the general issues that we talked about, can include anything that comes up in all of our projects or many of our projects. It should also include specific policies and plans and procedures for especially recurring but even one-time situations where some of these issues might come up and might need special rules. Those rules should be there so everybody can see them and so everybody can follow them. In summary, what we need to do for risk management is identify our risk based on whatever policies, common sense, rules, and laws we have, mitigate that risk. We need to implement that policy when we are doing events, when we are selecting events, when we're training for events, and in our general everyday procedures within the fraternity. For more information, please feel free to talk to your advisors, liaisons, section chairs, region chairs, or any of our other volunteer staff that you feel might be helpful. Thank you for your time.